Chapter 3, Everyday Life in Camp. As heretofore stated, the design of this volume is to not only give an account of the military achievements of the regiment, but also a portrayal of the everyday life of the soldier as it occurred in camp, on the weary march or perilous picket line, and in the hospital, where were found the sick, wounded, or dying comrades. While Army life had much of the pathetic, it also had its bright side. To the soldier, fun was as indispensable as food. Without this essential to brighten their otherwise cheerless lives, Army service would have been unendurable, and thousands would have died of homesickness. Leaving descriptions of our numerous battles, campaigns, and raids to succeeding chapters, we will devote this to the more ordinary phases of Army life. To the old veterans, some of the occurrences, camp duties, etc., herein described may seem quite commonplace, but it should be borne in mind that the book will be read by those not familiar with Army experiences. A day in camp. In the ordinary routine of camp duties, reveille was sounded at daybreak. It consisted of several quick and slow tunes played alternately by the drum corps, sometimes preceded by the trumpeter. It was the signal for all the men to assemble in their company streets for roll call, and the familiar commands of the orderly sergeants were heard. Turn out for roll call. If some were a little slow, the impatient orderly would shout some commands not found in the book of regulations. Lively there, you slow pokes. Hurry up, old sleepyhead. Get a double-quick gait on and don't keep us waiting all day. Often, if a minute late, the unfortunate fellow would be marked absent, and as a punishment sent out upon picket or given some extra duty. Thus there was no yawning or second napping. The men soon learned to spring to their feet at the first toot of the bugle or tap of drum. An hour after reveille came breakfast call, consisting of but one tune, when, if company cooks were in vogue, the dulcet strains of the orderly's voice would again be heard shouting, "Fall in for grub!" During the first few months, we had company cooks, who unfortunately were not graduates from a cooking school. In fact, some were so inexperienced they could hardly boil a potato properly. Then our Uncle Sam did not supply us with choice dainties, and what he did provide, these cooks usually managed to spoil, or it was dished out only half done. As the men marched up with their tin cups and plates, it was easy to tell from their looks of disgust that they were not receiving quail on toast, porterhouse steak, or the delightful fried ham and eggs of mother's table. Dinner and supper were similar, with nothing on the bill of fare calculated to tempt the palate of an epicure. Our usual ration was a chunk of corned beef having very much the smell of an old tannery, and a cup of coffee the color of blackstrap molasses, and about as astringent and uninviting as if dipped from a tan vat. The so-called corned beef was of a reddish shade, coarse and offensive, and always designated as salt horse. The boys declared the rank-smelling stuff was unfit for soap grease and would make the well-fed northern swine turn up their noses in disgust. As an illustration of Army cooking, we one day noticed our cook preparing some rice for dinner. At once there came before us visions of those deliciously palatable dishes prepared by mother or wife. What a delightful change of diet to have set before us a plate of white, savory rice. But alas, alas, how sadly were all our bright anticipations crushed, for instead of the white, puffy delicacy we had in mind, we only received a lot of dirty brown slush burned to bitterness. It had been cooked in the same old black sheet iron kettle in which the rusty salt horse had been boiled, and the kettle not even washed out. As fast as the rice burned on the bottom, it had been stirred into the rest. At first, beans were spoiled in a similar manner. It is, however, due the cooks to say that most of them improved by experience, and gave us as palatable fare as could be expected from the material furnished them. It is also proper to say that the quartermaster, often censured for furnishing such rations, was blameless, as he furnished the best at his command. In camp we had hardtack and frequently soft bread, the latter usually drawn loose in dirty wagons and dumped upon the ground by the indifferent teamsters. We, however, usually skinned our loaves, that is, cut off the outside before using. Company cooking in time became unpopular and was dispensed with, the men greatly preferring to form themselves into squads or messes of from 4 to 6 and prepare their own food. After breakfast came the surgeon's, or sick, call, when might be heard that familiar though not strictly regulation command, "Fall in for quinine." Sometimes a cadaverous procession of from 50 to 100 men would wobble up to where the surgeon and hospital steward were dealing out medicine. Quinine was prescribed to such an extent that the old veterans had a doggerel song, which our boys quickly picked up and sang to the music of the bugle. "Come for quinine, get your quinine, tumble up you sick and lame and blind, get along right smart, you'll be left behind." There were two classes who answered to sick call, those really sick and in need of medicine, and the playoffs, who resorted to all manner of trickery to shun duty, and who usually threw their medicine in the fire as soon as out of the doctor's sight. It is not strange that our regiment of 1,000 men should have a few of the latter class, who, however, through the workings of the law of the survival of the fittest, were mostly weeded out before the end of our first year. Let not this remark be construed as a reflection upon those noble boys who, because of hardships or ravages of disease, were compelled to leave the service against their wish or desire. Some may recall a story current in the regiment that our surgeon had caught on to the tricks of a certain duty dodger, and when, as usually, he appeared with his improvised wry face, the doctor prescribed a big dose of castor oil and compelled him to swallow it on the spot. It is needless to say that chap soon had other business than lounging quietly in his tent. Half an hour after surgeon's call, the drummer gave the warning for guard mounting, calling the guard detail to collect in their company streets. In the meantime, the drum corps assembled on the parade ground and played a quick step, to which the guards marched out and into line. When the lines were properly formed, the adjutant and sergeant major went through certain prescribed drills, and as the band played, inspected the guns and accoutrements of the guards. Next in order, the adjutant gave the commands, "Parade rest! Troop beat off!" When the band wheeled and, playing a slow time tune, marched down the line in front of the guards, then countermarched to the place of starting, giving at each end of the line the 3 cheers on the fifes and drums. The adjutant next turned, and saluting the officer of the day, reported, "Sir, the guard is formed." When the further ceremonies were over, the new guards were marched out to relieve the old and to remain on duty 24 hours. Guard mounting was followed by picket mounting, the formalities being similar. Battalion drill, referred to in the previous chapter, usually lasted 2 hours from 10 to 12 o'clock. The writer, as chief musician, was also required to drill the band during the same hours. There were also similar drills in the afternoon. In this connection, we will state that as a relief from the monotony of the usual battalion drills, the boys greatly enjoyed going outside the camp for skirmish practice, to which particular attention was given after our first battle at Deserted Farm. A comrade, whose army letters have been placed at my disposal, gives this animated description of those drills, under date of March 5th, 1863. We are now having beautiful weather and are drilling every day at a lively rate in skirmish work. It is a splendid drill, but very tiresome, as it is nearly all double quick. Yet we enjoy it hugely. We practice skirmishing over rough ground and through bush and woods. Half the battalion are deployed as skirmishers, while the other half are held in reserve. Whenever the skirmishers advance or retreat, the reserves do the same. We sometimes double quick half a mile on a stretch over ditches, rifle pits, through brush and woods. I wish you could be here to see us when we make a bayonet charge. The order is given, "Charge bayonets, forward, double quick," and away we go, yelling like savages. You can imagine the racket 800 men can make, everyone trying to make more noise than the rest. While Lieutenant Colonel Thorpe or Major Scott are putting us through the drill, Colonel Gibbs will watch us, his old fat sides shaking with laughter until almost ready to burst. Both he and General Terry take great pride in the 130th New York and claim that, excepting the 13th Indiana, it is the best drilled regiment in this department, and we are bound to keep ahead. Dress parade. Few of the old charter members of the regiment have forgotten those fanciful dress parades at Suffolk, when near sunset the entire regiment, not on duty or excused, must appear in line upon the parade ground, arrayed in their finest toggery of military uniform. Conducted by Colonel Gibbs, these parades were exceedingly punctilious affairs. Every man well knew his fate should he presume to appear in line deficient in any of the strict requirements in dress or equipments. If a button was missing, a shoe unblacked or untied, the hair unkempt, the face or hands unwashed, the colonel's keen eye was sure to detect it, and woe to the unlucky wight, especially should the offense be repeated. It was presumed that before coming upon parade, each soldier had been thoroughly drilled in the execution of every maneuver required. The one who failed was sure to hear, "Try it again, clumsy," and after the parade would be organized into an awkward squad, and put through the drill until he could handle his arms properly. It seemed a long time, and very tiresome withal, to stand at parade rest for from a half hour to an hour during the reading of orders, silent and motionless as a row of statues, with the guardhouse penalty before the man who would venture to even brush a fly from his face, and those pertinacious Suffolk flies too. Numerous as during the plagues of Egypt, they swarmed everywhere, and at this particular time, when our hands were tied by military requirements, took grim delight in traveling over our faces, while the big swamp mosquitoes got in their bloodthirsty work upon the back of our necks and hands. A detailed account of all the maneuverings of dress parade would require too much space, therefore only the principal features will be noticed. At a given signal, the band marched out and took position on the extreme right of the parade ground, while the several companies formed in their company streets. As the band played, all marched out and formed in order of battle on the left of the band. The formalities were similar to guard mounting, only on a grander and more impressive scale. The colonel, or senior officer, standing in front of the center of line, took command of the parade, which often consisted of from 700 to 800 or more men. The companies being properly aligned, the adjutant commanded troop beat off when the band moved out, wheeled, and playing common time, marched down in front of the line, then about faced and striking up a lively quick step, marched back to its place on the right, giving the ruffle or 3 cheers on fifes and drums at each end of the line. After various maneuverings, the adjutant brought the ranks to open order and aligned the company officers 4 paces and the field officers 6 paces in front when at the command, "Present arms." They saluted the commanding officer. The adjutant also in turn saluted and reported, "Sir, the parade is formed." After the several commands of the colonel in the manual of arms had been briskly executed, and the first sergeants had been to the front and center to report, the adjutant gave attention to the reading of orders. The dress parade was regarded as the great event of the day and was frequently witnessed by crowds of spectators. Usually during the interval from dress parade to bedtime, all not on detail were free from further duty and could devote the time to recreation, letter writing, storytelling, singing, and other indulgences as their tastes inclined them. Tattoo, usually occurring about 9 o'clock in winter and later in the summer, was the signal for all soldiers to repair to their quarters for the night. This consisted of several quick and slow tunes by the band, ending up with a lively double quick. Half an hour after tattoo, taps was sounded when all lights were put out and loud talking ceased. While this chapter is fairly descriptive of the average day in camp, it is not to be understood that all days were alike. There were, of course, numerous interruptions and changes of program. Various incidental requirements such as policing or cleaning up of the camp, attendance at funerals, and similar duties required time and attention. Often the camp was almost depopulated by extra-large details for picket and fatigue duty. Then there were those numerous reconnoitering expeditions, calling out the able-bodied portion of the regiment upon long marches, sometimes of several days' duration, an account of which will be given in a subsequent chapter. Inspections and reviews were also among the experiences of all soldiers. There were the usual Sunday morning company inspections, from which none were excused except those on guard or sick. At these, as on regimental inspections, the men were formed in line with ranks opened, while the inspecting officer carefully examined the dress and general appearance of the men, together with all the accoutrements, knapsacks, etc. The inspector, attended by company officers, also examined the quarters of the men, the bunks, bedding, cooking arrangements, and other things pertaining to the daily life of the soldier. Going beyond the regimental organization, we had the brigade, division, and corps reviews, on which occasion the troops of these respective commands, after being inspected in line, would pass in review before the general and staff. A brigade consisted of several regiments, a division of 2 or more brigades, and an army corps of several divisions under command of a major general. On one or more occasion, all the forces at Suffolk were reviewed by Major General Dix, commanding the department, and were affairs of considerable magnitude and splendor of military display. All the troops, infantry, cavalry, and artillery were out in full force, together with the wagon trains and ambulances. The insertion of an army letter descriptive of one of the grand reviews, written during its occurrence, will enable the reader to witness the affair somewhat as it appeared to an observing private soldier. Fort Dix, 2 miles east of Suffolk, Virginia, 10 a.m., November 12, 1862. Dear wife, this letter is commenced under rather peculiar circumstances. We are today having a grand review of all the forces at Suffolk, and as on such occasions we have intervals of rest, I shall, for the novelty of the thing, attempt a description of what occurs just as we see it here on the review ground. Our regiment has just marched out and is so stationed that we may not move for an hour. Could you be here at this moment, you would behold a scene surpassing anything you ever witnessed. I am now about 20 rods from Fort Dix, and as I write, there are probably not less than 20,000 soldiers in full view. The ground is as level as a prairie, and on every side we can see nothing but soldiers. Off to our left and in front and rear are lines of infantry nearly a mile in length, while to our right and rear the cavalry are now forming on. In front and beyond the 3 lines of infantry we can see and hear the approach of the artillery. Viewed in its entirety, it is a grand and imposing scene. All now is commotion, regiment after regiment being on the move, with all their bands playing at once and each a different tune. One is rattling off Yankee Doodle, another just behind is wrestling with Hail Columbia, while a mounted band are tooting lustily at Old John Brown. all together making a ludicrous jargon of melody very amusing to hear. Now the artillery have commenced firing a salute to the general who has appeared in the distance. Boom goes one of the big guns in the fort, the report of which makes one's ears ring. But General Dix and his long retinue of staff officers are rapidly advancing. The command, "Attention," is heard, and I must instantly cease writing. 2 p.m. Well, we are still on the review ground, but until now have been constantly in motion or occupied since 11 o'clock, and I will briefly relate what has occurred. First in order came inspection, in which the general, followed by his staff, rode along the several regimental lines, critically viewing his valiant warriors, and incidentally giving us a good square look at the great mogul of this military department, as well as to witness a great display of fuss and feathers on the part of the chieftain and his gold-bedecked understrappers. An Irishman in the regiment next to us has convulsed our boys by calling out, "Keep quiet, you fellers, there comes old Shoot-'em on the spot." As the general approached the head of each regiment, the bugler sounded "To the general," followed by the drum corps with 3 cheers or ruffle and "Hail to the chief." The inspection occupied about an hour, after which came the review, the grandest of all the proceedings. Our regiment has been the rounds, and we are now resting at our starting point. There were 3 lines of regiments in front of us, each nearly a mile long, and in front of all General Dixon's staff took a position. The lines nearest first passed before him until our turn came, when we too wheeled into line and passed in review, my band playing a national air. Could our friends in the North witness even this display of soldiery, they would cease to wonder why it cost such vast sums to carry on the war, yet what I now see is but a drop in the ocean compared with the mighty armies in the East and West. But another gun at the fort announces that the review is over, and I must put up my portfolio and fall in for the return march to camp. James. On our return to camp, Colonel Gibbs assured me he was highly pleased with the appearance and performance of our band. Also said the 130th Drum Corps received special compliment from General Dix for its efficiency. Funerals. No occurrences at Suffolk will be recalled with keener feelings of sadness than those mournful and oft-repeated funeral processions to the soldiers' cemetery, where so many of our comrades were laid away in their last earthly resting place. It was the writer's lot, in charge of the music, to participate in nearly or quite every funeral service from the 130th New York. In order of procession, the band was in the advance, and with muffled drums played a solemn dirge, or dead march. Next in order were the 6 pallbearers of same rank of deceased, followed by the escort with arms reversed. For a private, the escort consisted of 8 men, for a corporal 12, for a sergeant 14, and for a captain the whole company. All desiring could join in the procession. On reaching the grave, we having no chaplain, a brief address was sometimes made by another, the escort resting on arms. The body being lowered, 3 rounds were fired over the grave, after which the band struck up a lively quick step and marched back to camp. An incident furnished by Corporal E.F. Newcomb of Company D exemplifies the versatility of our men. By request of Lieutenant James, Chief of Engineers, General Peck detailed Newcomb to construct several signal towers, the one at Suffolk rising from the roof of a large house. His plan for the tower was accepted in competition with one by a West Point graduate. When the tower was ready to raise, a detail of 40 men from Corcoran's Legion was ordered to assist, but only 3 of the number could be persuaded to venture upon the roof. Next day, a like number of Negroes was sent, but when directed to climb the long ladder, the leader replied, "Dat's a right smart caper, massa," and not one would make the ascent. "What shall we do?" inquired the chief engineer. "Get a detail of men from the 130th New York," said Newcomb. It was done, and not a man failing, the tower was quickly erected. The same comrade relates his experience with a squad of Negroes working on a fort. He ordered them to carry some timbers to a certain place. They gazed at him in blank astonishment, but made no move. "Why don't you fellows carry them timbers into the fort, as I tell you? Don't know what yer wants, boss," said one of them. "Does yer done want it toted?" When answered in the affirmative, the timbers were toted with alacrity. Quite generally, in the South, tote was used for carry. Cooking in the army. Many became expert in the preparation of food, considering our limited material. One way was to fry pork and then to fry the hardtack to a crisp in the grease, which with coffee made a palatable meal. For a change, we cut pork into small pieces, then pounded up hardtack and boiled all together. This dish was called loblol. Another way was to put the hardtack into a small strong bag and, laying it on a stump or stone, pound to a powder with a hatchet, then make into a batter and bake into pancakes. This with melted sugar was a luxury. There were many other methods of preparing dishes which necessity, the mother of inventions, compelled us to originate, anything for a change.